Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Um, and let me move this. I am trying to record this on both Facebook and YouTube, so we'll see how this goes. I'm hoping the audio is fixed and better on this one. So again, we'll see how it goes. Worst come to worst, I should be able to download it from Facebook if it's okay, and not on YouTube. Um, I wanted to have this conversation on the political commentators slash artists struggle for clarity and integrity. And that's expansive, but you look at the time you're in and you're inundated with information. Whatever perspective you want, that perspective is out there. You'll find something confirmed that particular perspective. There's a certain level of confirmation bias. How do you know you're right? How do you know they're wrong? Certainly they're looking at something. Certainly you're looking at something. um I threw myself into this field, and like anything else, I tend to be single-minded in a pursuit. I'm bad at managing other things, but if it's something that I'm with and I'm focused on and I'm locked in on, I'm fucking immaculate. I am awesome. That being said, I'm bad at the other stuff. Now, in throwing myself into this, I there's this there's this aspect of this where let me explain it this way. I need a chess reference. Sometimes you're in a game, and while you're in the middle of the game, you may sack a piece. You may sack a pawn, whatever. You do something that's risky. And doing something that's risky, your thought is, I'm going to try to get this guy. But here's the thing, you haven't planned it out all the way. I mean, you can't see around every corner that's associated with that particular action, whatever that action is. You can't see it. You can't see around the corner. You're making this bet that your skills, the things that make you up, who you are, is adequate enough to get that guy. No, I don't know what's going to take place. Yes, I think the position is in my favor. Yes, I think I can get this guy. But no, I don't know. I'm unclear. I make one move after the next. I look as far as I possibly can. And in making those one moves after the next, I try to nurse a position that adequately achieves my objectives. I say that to say it's not that different. I mean, there's a difference in regards to you're not in a two-dimensional space and you don't have a set number of pieces with a set number of powers to articulate a set perspective or a set goal or objective. But it is pretty similar. Threw myself into this field. And initially it was, all right, I want to do commentating. Then at some point I realized what you do is not necessarily a commentator. It's a commentator, but it's also a certain level of art. Um, but it's art with an objective in mind. You put your virtues out, your failings, your weaknesses, your strengths, your intellect. You put those things out into the world knowing those things are going to be attacked and ripped at and taken apart. Because ultimately you want this ideal, this ability to change things. The majority of the world doesn't do this. And the majority of the world, even when they get into YouTube itself, don't do this. You're unique in this point. And yes, I'm talking about me, but I would imagine this also applies to everyone else. In putting yourself out there, you go for this goal of how do I change things? But you're always inundated with this question of what's right? What's right? What's true? Where's clarity? Stuck in this level of ambiguity that you can't get past. Um, I was having this conversation with my wife yesterday. And having this conversation with my wife, she was like, yeah, you're talking at me. I'll talk to you later. I said, so fine, I'll have it on YouTube. Um, but I don't think this is a minor issue. Sometimes I wonder if my model of this stuff is just way wrong and my model just boils down to a certain level of cynicism. And that cynicism is right just because of the muck and the shit that we find ourselves. It's constant. So it's, yes, my perspective on this, my model on this applies. only because the level of crumminess to which we exist in regards to politics and media and everything else, in regards to the vagaries of our world. You understand that if you were a visiting being from another planet and you saw this planet, you'll be aghast at the things that the people on this planet take as normal. Now, to some degree, I think that's part of the solution, meaning clarity, ambiguity. Those things are just part of it. I always make this point that in the world of this information age, truth was the first thing to take the hit. And the same way when you're playing chess, and the same way, again, you're doing that attack, you're making those moves, you're making those pieces do something, even though you can't necessarily see the end result, even though you can't necessarily see the end goal. Well, this is kind of similar. You throw yourself into a particular field, you can't see the end goal, you can't see the end result, you don't know how you're going to be attacked, you don't know how you're going to move things forward, you have no clue you're going to change things. But you do it just for the hope of trying to change things. And in the process of doing this in the hope of trying to change things, you struggle, magnificently struggle, to also maintain your integrity in the process. Meaning there is a pressure on you to go against things that you dislike, even if you're being somewhat dishonest in doing that. That's a struggle, believe it or not. Well, it's not even believe it or not. Of course you can believe it. When Bill Maher came out with the end thing, and I'm like, yeah, that's not racist. That sucks. He's horrible for doing it, but no, that's not racist. Well, that's bucking a trend. That's bucking a narrative. It's like you're aware of your audience, but you're bucking your audience. The question boils down to what is the position of integrity? And when you put your stake in the ground and trying to determine that integrity, you do so knowing full well that you're going to piss somebody off in that process. But your goal, in a sense, again, is somewhat unclear, but you struggle to maintain your integrity despite the unclarity and despite the ambiguity. It's not an easy feat to do. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. You find yourself making alliances. You find yourself affiliating yourself with people, not intentionally, just organically. Just people who are similar to you, and in being similar to you, you always have to have this awareness of, yes, we're similar. Yes, to some degree, we're in the same sandbox, but no, I am alone. Because you need to be alone. Otherwise, you find yourself being biased. Again, that's not easy. That is a struggle to maintain your integrity in a world of ambiguity, in a world of unclarity. Um, I don't necessarily know truth. The only thing I think you can really do is say, this is my bias. My bias is towards humanity. And having a bias towards humanity, you focus on this thing of one choice after the next, after the next. Full well understanding that that choice is going to be unclear, that choice is going to be ambiguous, and at times that choice is going to be wrong. You're a human being. Your choices at times are going to be wrong. Not because you're trying to be wrong. None of that. Not because you're biased, at least in my case, but because you're imperfect. And the information to which you find yourself is somewhat unclear. You're perched at the edge of the world and you're looking at these things. And in looking at these things, you make some evaluation based upon who you are. Because understand, your evaluation in many respects is who you are. Yes, you're getting information. Yes, you're commenting on the information, but that comment is a direct result of who you are. How do you maintain integrity? How do you find clarity in a world that's perfectly unclear and in a world where integrity is not a high currency? You're stuck between this thing of Sanders, Trump, Clinton, Obama. There are affiliations that you have based on race, gender, sexuality, all of these things trying to rapture you. All of these things annoy the shit out of me because ultimately all these things to be boiled down to you're a human being. And the world that you want to create is one for human beings, not for any particular demographic, not for any particular sect, while at the same time recognizing that those things are real. What my race is in this culture, what my gender is in this culture, those things, what my job is, those things directly affect how people perceive me in this particular culture, in this particular society. So those things are things that you need to weigh and balance as you go about your way, particularly in regards to how people perceive other people of that gender and that race, that sexuality. You have to be aware of those things, even though you can't necessarily ultimately be enraptured by those things, if that makes sense. I'm sorry if I'm being somewhat unclear here, but I guess I'm trying to make this point of it's not the easiest thing in the world to find clarity. When the Washington Post, New York Times, all these guys post fake news, Comey in his testimony kind of made this point of, yeah, you look at these guys and these guys don't know what they're talking about, and they're doing a story and that story is completely bogus. They have millions of dollars to come up to some determination of what's true, and they get it wrong. They led us into a war that killed 1 million Iraqis. Nobody was brought for blame. Nobody was held up to say this person is responsible for this particular action. Where in God's green earth is there clarity in this world? I would argue clarity doesn't exist. Of trying to discern what's true in regards to politics and everything else. You will have people who try to get you to believe a narrative, but they want you to believe a narrative. That's different than truth, and that's different than honesty. That's different than coming to some consensus on what's real. I'd argue that that clarity is not to be found. It's not to be found. You can perch yourself at the edge of the world. You can look out at these things, but some things are going to be obfuscated by your perspective. Some things are going to be obfuscated because they're intentionally obfuscated by people who don't necessarily want you to know what's going on. The only thing I can say, and the only thing that I can try to base my stuff on, is I can put my stake in the ground in humanity. That's a big word. That's a massive, massive word. I don't even know what that word means in a sense. I guess what I'm getting at is this thing of what preserves human life, human dignity, what asserts the worth of the individual. And then trying to figure out what asserts the worth of the individual, what asserts how do you persist a world that's best for the individual, regardless of all this other subordinate reality and everything else. How do you persist a world that's best for the person? You put your stake in the ground right there. Bang that shit in as hard as you can bang that shit in. And you tie yourself to that by string, by rope, or by chain. And as the winds and everything else and all these perspectives and all these people who want to try to get you to believe something, you maintain that stake and that tether into the ground. Regardless of what those people say about you, regardless of how you're vilified, regardless of whether your narrative conflicts with their narrative, ultimately, if that stake is in that ground, you can always have something that you can hang your hat onto, something you can always go back to, and something you can at the very least assert that says, look, regardless of whatever takes place, I at the very least understand that I'm working towards the benefit of humanity. I may get it wrong sometimes. I may not be right sometimes. I may be way in the weeds sometimes. I may buck the trend and go against my audience sometimes. But I do so because I plant my stake in the ground of honesty, integrity, and humanity. It's not easy. You're going to fuck up in that process. You accept it. You're going to be attacked in that process. You accept it. You accept it. Um, what preserves life? What persists life? And what does so in a way that's to the betterment of the world that you exist in? And beyond that, how do you create a world where you're not beat over the head from the time you're born to the time you die, where you don't have these predators waiting to jump on people to try to extract something out of them for their own benefit while that person goes through their existence? How do you create a world where that person goes from point A to point B and is somewhat secure in their existence? They're not in a situation of lack. That person didn't ask to be here. They didn't ask. Nobody asked to be here. At least not on a physical matter reality level. On a corporeal level, that choice was never made. That person shouldn't be vilified and beat over the head. I'm making this point that if you put your stake in the ground of humanity, that regardless of whatever takes place, regardless of the unclarity, regardless of the stories, news, everything else that comes up, at the very least, you have something that you can base a perspective on. You can base an opinion on. It's not fly by night. It's not all up in the air and everything else. This is where I put my stake. This is where my belief stands. I may be wrong sometimes. I may fuck up sometimes. I may say something that's a little off the rails. At the end of the day, I put my stake in humanity. I would argue that that's the only thing you can do. Clarity is nowhere to be found. Integrity, however, is. It's a struggle. You fight to maintain it. You fight with every fiber of your being to resist entanglements and try to have a clear angle, have a clear lens when you're looking at that stuff. But it's not easy. It's not easy. And in doing so, you try to look at this thing, you get frustrated, you get annoyed, you get pissed off. Part of that being pissed off is you're a goddamn dreamer. I wonder sometimes whether it's cynicism that allows you to be right. And cynicism only from a standpoint of this world is so fucked up that the cynical position is often the position that's correct. I rebuff that and I fight against that because that doesn't necessarily get you anywhere. Yes, you'll be right, but understand you're right only because the world is a fucked up place, not because you did anything amazing in coming to a particular position. I wonder and I struggle on whether or not some of my positions result to a level of cynicism. That being said, I also have to understand that to some degree I am a dreamer. I get it. I look at the world and I look at it and say, what can the world be? 8 years. In the same way you look at that board and you say, all right, what can this be? What do I have at my disposal to get this to be the position that I want it to be? You do the same thing when you look at the world, particularly when you decide to put your virtues and your strengths and your weaknesses and your failings on YouTube with this idea of trying to push things forward. You struggle with it. You push. You try to bitch. You moan. You try to do things to try to get this world 1 inch, whatever the capacity that inch means in a sense of moving things forward in this intangible thing. You push. You push. You push as hard as you can possibly push in the means that you have at your disposal to push. There's some people who that means politics. There are other people who that means artists. There are other people who that means being political commentators. Whatever that degree is, you push. You hope that you get it right. In my particular case, that push comes with a certain level. I don't want to say anger because that's a bad word for it. I would say angst. You have this very clear conception in your head of what life can be. Very clear. You're aware of it. You've thought about it. You've seen it in your head. And you're cursed with this idea of, yes, you have this image in your head of what humanity can be. Humanity doesn't have to be this way. This world can be a virtuous world where people have the things that they need to persist themselves. You can see that. It's clear to you. It's clear to you. You fully understand that if people work together, this world can be a goddamn beautiful place. That is not the world to which we inhabit. Mainly because you have people who want to advantage themselves. And people who are living within the status quo of this particular country, 5% of the world, get paid off at various degrees in that scale. So yes, this guy's making $1 billion. This other guy's making $1 million. This other guy's making $100,000. This other guy's making $50,000. This other guy's making $30,000, and down the scale. But understand, each person to degree in that particular scale is receiving a bribe. That bribe allows them to persist themselves and say fuck everybody else. Understand though that it is somewhat of a bribe in regards to this particular system. How many people deal with the people who are at the bottom rung of the society? How many people focus on the people who are at the bottom rung of that society? Not many. Not many. Not many people even talk about it. I'm making this point that your living, your ability to have food and shelter, to go to somewhere to get something to eat, to go to a restaurant, to go to a vacation, that stuff, for the most part, allows you to go on and allows you to go on in a way that doesn't necessarily, that has somewhat of a bias in regards to not paying attention to the people below you. Not because you're a bad person, not because you're evil and you're racist and all this other stuff. That's ridiculous. You're a person. You want to persist yourself. You love your family. You want to have a particular life and you want to be someone comfortable in that life. It just so happens that being comfortable in that life blinds you to the suffering of others in this particular world. I'm saying from the dreamer's perspective, from the artist's perspective, from my perspective, I look at this and find this to be completely unnecessary and find that this world can be whatever you want this world to be. And trying to articulate that to other people is not the easiest thing in the world because those people aren't necessarily artists or those people don't necessarily have that eye. It's almost like it's the role of the dreamer to get across that to other people. And in some degree, this channel tries to do that. Whether you're writing articles, whether you're trying to push it forward. I don't know other people's objectives. I know mine. I want a different world. I want a better world. I don't necessarily know how to achieve that. I don't even know necessarily the clarity of getting to that point. I would argue that that's not the case. That's not necessary. In the same way you sack a piece to try to go after somebody, in this particular case, you do your best to go in the right direction. If it's filled with integrity, you at the very least a hell of a lot further than other people. And that's assuming that their goal is integrity. That's mine. That's mine. Yes, I'm willing to mar that if I can get to that particular world, meaning to some degree, does the ends justify the means? To varying degrees, but ultimately, I would rather focus on this level of integrity and the things that you're doing, because I think you pull people to your side when you have that certain level of integrity associated with your behavior, with your actions, with your words, with the things that you say, the allegiances that you make, and the allegiances that you break. Leave it at that. Um, this world doesn't have to be this way. That's all I'm saying. And it's aggravating, absolutely aggravating. When you see me losing my shit on here, it's not random. It's you're stuck with this vision of what the world can be. And you're also stuck with this idea that these other people don't see it. They're trapped in their context, their reality box. They're trapped in a reality box that completely excludes this idea of what the world can be, meaning they can only see one stone ahead. And even in seeing that one stone ahead, they're hesitant of taking that one stone because they become so much cynical in their reality. Oh, that's just human nature. Oh, it would always be this way. Oh, you guys are dreamers. Oh, you guys are this, you guys are that. What is the perspective of a slave? What is the perspective of a slave? That slave who wanted something to be different, was that guy a dreamer? And did that guy turn out to be right? Yes, it took 200 years, but or 400 or 500 years. But was that guy right? Slave with the lashes on his back that lay there at night, thinking of a world that could be a different place. Was he right? Yes, he was right. Those others who told him, dude, it would always be this way. Don't look at those things that way. You're only making your life difficult by looking at those things that way. That guy was wrong. That guy has been wrong at every point in history. That guy was wrong. That guy continues to be wrong. They seem right in the context of the history or the reality to which we find ourselves, but ultimately those people turn out to be wrong. This world does change. The arc of history is long, but it bends towards fairness. Which side of the political spectrum do you think deals with fairness? It's not Democrats. It's not Republicans. It is a far left. It is the far left. I argue that we are the dreamers, but we also are the people who pull the society forward because of that dream, because we bitch and we complain and we try to hold people accountable. Yes, they call us lefties. Yes, they call us the far left, all that stuff, whatever. But ultimately, when you look at the arc of history, we are the ones who have been right. We've been right. We have a track record of being right. We pull this goddamn society forward, whether they want to be pulled forward or not. I'm making this point that whether you have clarity, whether you're certain of your position, you sit at the edge of the world and you make choices. Those choices are based on this level of integrity and humanity. And if you can do that, whether you're YouTube, whether you're a writer, whatever, if it's based in that, even if you're somewhat unclear on the information, at the very least, you should be clear that your goal is improvement of humanity. That's what I'm getting at. The clarity is not in the news. It's not in the minutia. The clarity is of yourself and your position and the things that you want to accomplish. And you balls out, try to get that vision of your world into other people's consciousness and other people's minds so they can see that particular world to try to move forward in that particular world. That's all you can do. That is minor. It is aggravating that that is the only thing you can do, at least from right now and from the way that I can see it. Even with political action, you're still stuck with this vision of, how do I get my vision of the world across? How do I get across to these goddamn cynical people that the world can be a different place? That working 50 hours a week is not a life. That's not freedom. Being chained to a job for 40, 50 hours for minimum wage in a capitalist society where your finances, the amount of cash that you have, is your decision space. Understand what I'm saying? That's perfectly true. That point is unassailable. Nobody can touch that point. If you're saying that you're free and you're working 40 hours a week in a job that you despise, at which point did that become freedom? At which point did that become freedom? You've chosen your plantation, but you're still working on a goddamn plantation. And you're working for dick and piss. And ultimately, The amount of cash that you have on your hands in a capitalistic society makes the determination of your decision space, meaning the decisions that you make, the choices that you make, are constrained by what's in your pocket. And if the majority of the country is in poverty, if the majority of the world is in poverty, living off $10 a day, where's the freedom? Where's the freedom? You don't have a decision space to do the things you want. Yes, you can buy Coke and Pepsi. That's great. That's great. You have your choice of Coke and Pepsi. But the larger decisions, the things that you want to do with your particular life, do you honestly believe that your life, your humanity, being filtered into a cog in a wheel of some job that you hate is the expression of who you are? And do you also honestly believe that that's all you are? You go to somebody and the first thing they say is, what do you do? Why? Why are you asking me, what do I do? How does that necessarily define who I am? And you believe that what you do in some degree is the measure of a man or the measure of the individual. The measure of the individual, the fact that that person exists. Yes, there are people who do things better than others. All that's true, but there is worth just by the virtue of existence. What I do in no way changes that worth. It makes me no less or no more. It doesn't. You have worth just by virtue of a being. Now, how do you get across that? How do you get across that, yes, you can have a world arranged in a way that that worth is accentuated? It's not denigrated. How do you get that across to people? When you can see it, how do you get it across to people? When they're saying stuff like, well, humanity is just crooked and it would always be this way. Those people don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And yes, they would say it and say it repeatedly. I'm saying that the artist's role, the role of the political commentator, the political artist, the guy who sits at the edge of the world and sees a world that doesn't have to be the world that that person is existing in. And they're cursed with this idea of this is my existence. And I'm fully aware that the existence to which I find myself doesn't need to be this way. It's contrived. It's a reality that to some degree I'm stuck in and I'm fighting against. And you know full well that you're going to fail in that fight and you fight in it anyway. Not because you're going to win, but because it's a struggle in the sense of changing humanity. You do the small measure that you can do to push the world forward before you leave this earth. In the same way, one person after the next made choices and decisions going back since the inception of this country to push this country forward. Those people didn't realize their dream in their lifetime. They did what they had to do to push this world forward to the degree that they could push this world forward, sometimes in inches, sometimes in miles. But they did it. They realized it was their responsibility, not because they were going to win and reap the benefits in their lifetime, but because they were going to reap the benefits at some point. I'd argue humanity is the point. I'd argue that clarity in this sense is not regarded to the news and the information that you get, but based upon, again, humanity, integrity, meaning you as the individual, not external, but you. What you do is what matters. It's what matters. Yes, people are going to try to push it forward. That's true. And yes, people are going to get in positions in political action and everything else. That's true. But all of those things still boil down to what the individual does and what the individual can get across in regards to their worldview. This is the world that I see. It is not a utopia, but it's a hell of a lot better than what we have. And if at the very least you can get a world or a country or politics that accentuate the values and the virtues of the human being and allows those virtues to be accentuated and self-actualized, meaning that person can be an optimum human being and that society functions to make sure that person is the optimum human being. In the way that we accentuate the worth of that individual, your worth is also asserted in that society. That's the society we need to push towards. Falls out with any and everything that we have in us to push towards that society. So I'll leave it at that. You'll never find clarity. You never find accuracy in everything that you're going to do. You'll never get to the point where you're certain about your path. Only thing that you can be certain about is, does the action that I take exalt humanity? Does the thing that I say attempt to exalt humanity? When I'm digging in the minutia and I'm coming to a perspective, does that perspective exalt humanity? When you're listening to people make certain political arguments, do those political arguments exalt humanity? Does it allow those people to be self-actualized? that does allow you as an individual to be the best human being that you are? Or does it do the opposite? Does it denigrate? Does it castigate? Does it find ways to divide and minimize? If your society or the things that you're pushing for in a society doesn't exalt the human being, then your society is going to have plagues and issues. And I'd argue that many of the reasons we have crime, war, poverty, the terrors that seek us, that go after us, the quagmire to which we find ourselves, whether you're talking about ecological, whether you're talking about the way concentration of wealth ruin and end societies. Civilizations fall when societies get to the point where the wealth is accrued in one particular spot. Understand what I'm saying? I'm saying that the collapse of civilization is not this conceptual thing. Do you honestly believe that other civilizations have not collapsed? Why do you believe those civilizations collapsed? Why? Why? Why do you believe that this society will always persist itself the way it is? I understand that you think that just because the prior year existed, that the next year would exist. It's a bad thing to believe. It's a bad thing to believe. You focus on things that will try to make humanity better and try to exalt humanity. And not in some conceptual figment way, but in literal terms and the policies that you push forward and the things that you try to get through legislation. Those things should exalt humanity. And if they're not working to the benefit of the individual. I don't give a shit what they say or what policy or what party is pushing it. I leave it at that. The artists and political commentators struggle for humanity and integrity, or integrity and clarity. Clarity is difficult to find externally. I would argue it's somewhat of a fool's errand. Clarity for the individual and the choices they make is not. You yourself know what you yourself are trying to accomplish. And if you're being honest in regards to trying to accomplish something that exalts humanity, that's your clarity. Your integrity in some degree is based off of that clarity and making positions and taking actions and making words that resolve in that. Everything else is out there. It's external. Anything that's external becomes somewhat of an ambiguity. There's no way to know. Yes, people push narratives, but again, there's no way to know. They're lying if they say they do. All you have is you. All you have is the things that you do. All you have, at least in regards to other people, are the things they say. And the only thing you can evaluate is against you. I'll leave it at that. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, write, subscribe. You can always support the work through Patreon. Thanks.